guy. And he was sitting there studying this and trying to look thoughtful. And he had also long, whiskers here. That was in at that time. And horn-rimmed glasses was in, and this kind of cut-in suit. So, there's a report. I know. It just shows you that we find out when individuals report the highest stress you had was when you're negotiating, the second highest stress when you had terribly planned activities. The highest intensity of stress reducers, now remember that's what you're after. That's when you were in one-on-one meetings or when you were on the telephone. So these were useful information. But what it did was to take, we tested 300 variables. That was everything that had been written up in the literature on proactivity, that this might work. Well, about 30 of them worked. 30 of them explain over 90% of the variation in performance of human beings. Nature is always elegant. If nature gets too complicated, you are not looking at nature. You're looking at some mathematical formula that looks splendid and should be nature, but isn't. So when we explain that, we did it by regression analysis. Remember I said Jones' proactivity was expressed as a linear additive regression analysis. But remember, in the regression analysis, if some variable correlates perfectly with a dependent variable, that's not the variable. That belongs on the left-hand side. That's part of what you're measuring. And when you have a variable that are linearly dependent or part of what you're measuring, you can't invert that regression equation. I know that a lot of you are not the kind of nerds that John is, so the inversion of a matrix is the least of your concern. But it is impossible if you have something here that correlates perfectly with that one. But what it does is to tell you what is perfectly correlated with proactivity. Or in this case, non-productivity. People always listed 0 when they were waiting. So we know that waiting time was an important thing in productivity, but it was the opposite of waiting time that was important, which was occupancy. There we had our first part of the productivity definition. Then you were doing things, we call it screening, doing something no one on earth should be doing. Well, give me a break. That's not a good thing. That has 0 relationship with your own productivity. So that's another part of productivity. But if you get rid of that, then that becomes a perfect part of productivity. And the same thing for delegating. Why should you do stuff that's better done by somebody else? If your competitor does that, you're out of business. And if you've gotten rid of what no one should be doing, what should be done but not by you, you're left with what you should do. Well, that you should do not just for the moment, but for tomorrow and the day after and the year after. That's where planning enters. Now you are effective. And that's interesting to me because effectiveness is exactly what you're after. That's doing the right thing. Then efficiency is of interest. Who cares if you're efficient at doing something you shouldn't be doing in the first place? 90% of all books, I'm trying to keep my voice going, so I'm eating cough tablets. 90% of all books on productivity are written by efficiency, which is incidental to productivity, irrelevant in most of the cases. So, what happened was, because they're so perfectly correlated, they were part of the definition, and hence the World Productivity Congress accepted that definition in the, it should be 1988 World Productivity Congress, not 1986. Sorry. A little error snuck in here. This is not flawless. That is what I was. Okay. If you do all of these things that are on the topic of freeing resources, you come up to what you tend to call extreme lean. And extreme lean is only possible if you guarantee people that they will have their job after they have helped you eliminate their jobs. So the important thing here is to say, what are you going to do with the free resources? Because then they will be eager to free it. Because two-thirds of their work is giving them immense stress and dissatisfaction because they feel so damn unproductive. Now you enter up what we call extreme innovation. That's the dreams. That's when you talked about Lincolnshire yesterday. Didn't you all feel the dream that was unraveling in front of you? And didn't you all want to be part of it? Every company has that. Every individual has that. But to go from first extreme lean, then to extreme innovation, you have to have a leadership of a totally different kind than most companies practice. And it's because of that leadership that in part causes the average life expectancy of a company to be 44 years. That's only half of what you're likely to live in this room. Corporate diseases are much more deadly than human diseases. So, a knowledge worker is doing stuff which is invisible to you, it's inside of his head. We pay knowledge workers $100,000 a year or more. I'm an economist, I use 4% interest rate. That means that they're worth $2.5 million. Now comes the most interesting part. 80% of all capital is intangible. If you're lucky, it comes in at 8 o'clock in the morning, it leaves at 5, and then if you're even lucky, they come back the next day. This is the most interesting thing that I had the pleasure of speaking about in China last week. I was at a party school. I thought, hey, lots of drinking, should be interesting. It was the communist party school. There was no drinking on the premises. Everybody sat up straight. And I talked about freedom, justice. And then the interesting thing. Well, Marx was right, I said. Marx said that capital has to be taken over by the proletariat. Proletariat now has the capital. It's in their hands. Now remember, Marx is not very, very far from here. And Adam Smith is not very, very far from here either. How many of you have heard about Adam Smith and Karl Marx? Oh, more than Ragnar Frisch and Leonid Hurwitz. These guys